I'm Ben Young, and I know I'm talking to Roger Bell, CEO of Vero, and Roger, you've just spoken at the Unlimited Business Intelligence Workshop, and I'm keen for some of your views on leadership. And interestingly, one of the first things that you kind of dove into as CEO of Vero is the use of frameworks as leadership within the organisation. Can you explain a bit more about that? Because I think initially most people would think Kiwis are resistant, or generally people in general are resistant to using frameworks for leadership.
Yes. Well, I think the proposition is, first of all, as a leader, I guess if you were running a small company, you would feel that you could engage frequently enough with a small team of people to deploy strategy and get input from the people and so on. But the challenge for all leaders is when you are dealing with sufficient numbers where you can't do that personally. How do you cascade strategy on a regular basis? How do you give your folk an opportunity to genuinely input into that? And last but no means least, even if you're doing brilliant things in some areas, how do you transfer that brilliance across the whole organisation? And not just a business, but any organisation. And so we were determined to be world class. We needed a framework, and the framework is a map, of course, and it gives us structures so that we advance on a systematic way. We deploy everything across all of our staff, from Whangarei to Invercargill, so they all feel that they're uniquely engaged. As you say, you wouldn't send a dry old roadmap out and say to the average Kiwi, we want you to be part of that. But the good frameworks, and the one we use is the Baldridge criteria of performance excellence. It doesn't tell you what to do, because how would it know about any New Zealand business? It more gives you serious questions around how world-class organisations do strategy, engage staff, relate to customers and so on. It asks challenging questions. So it doesn't say this is how you will do it, but it'll say show us how you do this in a world-class way. And that's normally about having world-class deployment and world-class measurement. Benchmarking yourself against the best in the world.
That sounds quite a challenge. How do values feed into this?
Well, values are everything, because world-class organisations are values-driven. Now, of course, that means they're not the values of the leader. They're everyone's values, values people would feel good about. So we launched our values many years ago, and we did that with the staff. They produced them. They created them, they even prepared media, so we would display that throughout the company. And lastly, they defined what they meant and what they didn't mean. So we have 4 values, and there's a long list our staff prepared. This means I will do these things, it means I will not do these things. And I thought it's terrific that when we achieved our World Class Award, we sent our staff away to say, all right, now come up with a new vision and a new mission and look at the values. And they very quickly, they consulted every staff member who said, we don't want the values to change at all. Now what that meant is they were confident we were living by them, that they were real.
That's incredible. Now, I just wanted to touch on this. You talked about systemising excellence and how frameworks and values feed into this. And Vero's very performance driven. How did this prepare you for the earthquake in Christchurch, which, as I think you mentioned, is industry changing for your industry?
Yes, it is, and really it will change our industry permanently. By definition, having frameworks gives you structures, and in those structures you have to be future-driven, future conscious. You need to have a sense. It wasn't hard as an insurer to say one day we will get the mother of all events. It might be in 50 years or it might be tomorrow. Now, we'd had a bit of practice because there's been some quite serious weather events around New Zealand. So in a practical sense, it meant we prepared where our technology was up and running, where our staff systems were good at having everyone in the communication loops. We had pre-prepared advertisements so our customers heard from us before they heard from our competitors.
Yeah.
And of course, in the end, with values, when your values are staff-driven, it wouldn't surprise you to know one of those 4 values is excellence. So I never literally asked anyone to go to Christchurch to help. They just descended in there, and they're working 15-hour days, and they refuse to take time off on the weekend because they're trying to look after the customer. Yeah. And in the end, that was values driven. What they demand of us is what we do has to be world class. Yeah. And so they want to respond to this event in a world class way.
That's awesome. So how many people did you get into Christchurch within the first day?
Well, we had a permanent staff of about 60. Yeah. Well, by Sunday, we had an extra 60 or 70 from around New Zealand. And they are people visiting customers. They're not people just shuffling paper. Yeah. So after about 3 or 4 days, we had this, the biggest volume of claims we've ever seen. Yeah. Well, 99% of those customers had been visited by an assessor. And you can imagine where those poor clients are not hearing from the government agency who partly insure them. They're reading the paper of chaos. This could be a 5-year event. Yeah. But within a few days, they had a Vero person parked outside their house or business telling them calmly, this is what we're going to do to re-establish you. And I didn't ask for that. It's just what our people instinctively wanted to do.
Interesting. In terms of how does your framework encourage and empower leaders within the organisation? Because it is such a big organisation.
Yes, it is, and I think it's not so much the framework that empowers them, it's our culture. Yeah. That those staff produced our vision statement, those staff produced our values. Yeah. Well, you can imagine, they take responsibility, they feel ownership, and where good things happen or bad things happen, our staff own it. They don't sit back and say, well, it's someone else's problem. And what was unique about the Christchurch experience, of course, and truly horrible, is a number of our staff have lost their houses, and yet they are at work looking after customers. And all of these extra people we sent into Christchurch to help, they are enduring 800 aftershocks. And when you haven't experienced an earthquake before, they actually literally are worried about, I might die. Yeah. And we are essentially office workers. Yeah. That's an interesting new dimension. Yeah. And I've worried about that. Yeah. We've counselled them. We've made sure they understand you don't have to be here. Yeah. And we've had health and safety people all over it. But in the end, it's commitment and passion.
Excellent. This all sounds quite amazing. Now, after having gone through a disaster like this, on top of the recession, how do you think your framework, is it going to change? Are you going to look at something new, or do you think this is robust enough and it's going to keep driving the organisation forward?
Well, our business, our company changes by the day because we have a lot of young people. They love change, they implement change, and as we heard during this morning's seminar. So the framework encourages that. It does not stand in the way of that. What we have to be good at doing is, as we change the way we do things, we must make sure that institutional knowledge is updated. And every now and then, when I sometimes challenge the people and say, boy, do we have to keep recording all this? People point out, yes, but Roger, what happens if a plane disaster happens or a building disaster and you lose the senior people in the company? There has to be a sustainability program in the business to make sure it's going strong in 100 years' time.
And just on a final note, what advice would you have for Kiwi CEOs at this point in time? Most of them have gone through the recession. Looks like we're pulling out.
I think resilience is of course a key word, and I guess anyone listening might think big deal, but I think the big thing is portraying that resilience to your people. Whatever Kiwis think deep down, they don't always tell you. But they get fearful. They're entitled to it. These are tough times. Yeah. And they read the media about job losses and business going offshore and climate change and recession and all those things. I think a leader's key role is, of course, to be optimistic about the way you run the company, but to convey a quiet assurance that the people understand that we're in this together.
Yeah.
We've survived an awful lot of things, and we will survive these challenges too.
So that's it for me. Thank you, Roger. I really appreciate it.
Okay, my
Cheers.
pleasure.